Good morning again. This is Pastor Steve, and we have what has happened is they have just arrested Jesus and they are taking him to trial. This is where the disciples have scattered. He is now alone, and so they take him into the court, and he is actually placed on about 7 different trials at this time, before Pilate, before the Sanhedrin court, before the high priest, and so all this is going on, and there's just so much happening that Jesus is being allowed. From this point on, Jesus really does not speak and utter anything. Very few words that he does speak until he actually gets on the cross. But in this, you have Peter is following from a distance. John is actually not part of the herd, but he's allowed into the courtroom, and so you find a lot of descriptions from John, and but Peter's account was that he was going to deny Christ 3 times before the cock crew. And this is all part of that time frame from trial to trial, that Jesus actually looks at Peter, and then the cock crows and all that whole story. But at this point, Jesus is slapped, he's beaten, he's mocked, and then he goes before Pilate, and Pilate sends him back to Herod. Herod mocks him and slaps him. And then he goes back to Pilate, and this is where they cry, "Crucify him." And in Matthew chapter 27, verses 27, we'll pick up there. It's actually the entire chapter of 27 of Matthew and John. It says, "And the soldiers took Jesus into the common hall and gathered into the whole band of soldiers, and they stripped him and put him on a scarlet robe, and there they plaited a crown of thorns. They put it upon his head and a reed in his right hand, and they bowed a knee before him and mocked him, saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' And they spit upon him and took the reed and smote him on the head. And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe from off him, put his own raiment on him, and led him away to crucify him." And just a little bit, in this, Jewish tradition is, if he's going to be whipped, it's going to be 39 times save 1. It's 40, but they're going to stop at 39. I want you to understand that these were not Sanhedrin guards beating Jesus. These were Roman professional soldiers who were executioners, and they knew what they were doing when they was beating Jesus. I could only imagine that these men were professionals, and they reveled in seeing the torture of somebody in pain. So when they had cat o' nine tails, which was sharp metals and bones and leather knots, and all this would wrap in, when they would wrap that around and whip that, these men knew what they were doing. It would dig into the flesh, and then they would expertly rip it back out, and chunks of flesh would be ripped off of the body of Jesus Christ. So not only was his back laid open, but his entire guts would be laid open. His chest would have been laid open. You could not imagine the beating. And it says that when he stood before Pilate, he looked just like a chunk of meat that was just hanging there because of the beating. But also the crown of thorns, it wasn't these little bitty thorns that we say ouch when we're going hunting or something. These were probably 3-inch long horns and thorns. Excuse me, not horns. But they took that reed and they drove that into his head. It wasn't just a light little tap and getting it perfect. They drove it as hard as they could, and it penetrated his skull. That's the type of beating that he suffered. That's the kind of, they were not gentlemen to our Christ. These were professionals who didn't really care about human life. They were experts at what they did. And so when you think about just the blood that was shed just in that area before he ever got to the cross. But I was thinking about this, and I'm thinking the intense beatings, the amount of blood loss that he had. It probably took him an hour to drag that cross. Oh, by the way, he carried his own cross up the hill to Golgotha. And it says in the word that they compelled Joseph of Arimathea because Jesus physically could not handle the weight of the cross. Not only had he not eaten, he had not sleeping, but he'd been beaten and beaten and just physically he took all of that, and yet it wasn't the beating that drove him. It was the love that he had for you that drove him. It was the love and the passion that he had to take your sins and my sins and nail them to that cross. It was a long trek, but he made it. And that's what's so vital, is we don't really realize how much he did suffer at this point.